The letter from Boston arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April of 1881, and Lila Norton watched through the dusty window as her stepmother Margaret fed it directly into the kitchen stove without breaking the wax seal. "That is mine," Lila said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. She had been waiting 3 weeks for word from her older brother Thomas, the only family she had left who still cared whether she lived or died. Margaret turned from the stove, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Nothing good comes from back east. Your father brought you out here to start fresh, and I will not have you pining after a life that no longer exists." She brushed ash from her fingers onto her apron. "You belong to this household now, and you will focus on your duties here." Lila's father had died 6 months ago, thrown from a spooked horse during a cattle drive outside Rayton, New Mexico. He had married Margaret only a year before his death, a widow from Santa Fe who seemed pleasant enough until the will was read, and she discovered she had inherited everything, including the small ranch on the outskirts of town and one stepdaughter she clearly considered a burden. Lila was 19 years old, and suddenly she found herself trapped in a house that no longer felt like home, with a woman who burned her letters and watched her every move with suspicious eyes. "I could go back to Boston," Lila said quietly. "Thomas would send money for the train fare if you would just let me write to him." "Absolutely not. Your father wanted you here, learning to be a proper woman, not running wild in some eastern city with ideas above your station." Margaret crossed her arms. "Now the chickens need feeding, and the garden needs weeding. I suggest you get to work." Lila left the house before she could say something she would regret. The morning sun was already hot against her face, promising another scorching day. The ranch sat at the edge of Rayton, where the prairie stretched out endlessly toward the mountains in the distance. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, so different from the Green Springs of her childhood in Massachusetts. She had come west with her father 2 years ago after her mother died of consumption. He had wanted a fresh start, a chance to build something with his own hands. Instead, he had found Margaret and a quick death, leaving Lila alone in a territory that still felt foreign. She fed the chickens mechanically, her mind on the letter burning in the stove. Thomas was only 3 years older than she was, working as a clerk in a shipping office in Boston. Their letters had been her lifeline, a connection to the girl she used to be before grief and distance had changed her. Now even that was gone. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. A rider was approaching from the direction of town, and as he drew closer, she recognized Zachary Jennings, one of the ranch hands who worked for the Taylor spread a few miles north. She had seen him in town a handful of times, always polite, always tipping his hat. He was young, probably only a few years older than she was, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He reined in his horse near the fence, removing his hat. "Morning, Miss Norton. I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Lila said, wiping her hands on her skirt. "Are you looking for Mrs. Norton? She is inside." "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you." He dismounted, looping the reins over the fence post. "I was in town yesterday and overheard Mrs. Norton at the post office. She was telling the postmaster not to give you any mail that arrived, that she would collect it herself." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This came for you 3 days ago. I convinced the postmaster to let me bring it out." Lila's heart leaped. She took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing Thomas's handwriting immediately. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." Zachary's expression was serious. "I have some idea. I lost my own family a few years back. Letters were all I had for a while." He glanced toward the house. "I should warn you, though. Mrs. Norton was quite insistent with the postmaster. She may cause trouble when she finds out." "Let her." Lila tucked the letter into her pocket, determined to read it somewhere private, somewhere Margaret could not snatch it away. "I am grateful to you, Mr. Jennings, truly." "Just Zachary, please." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less weathered. "And if you ever need anything, Miss Norton, you just let me know. I know what it is like to feel alone out here." He tipped his hat again and mounted his horse, riding back toward the Taylor ranch. Lila watched him go, her hand pressed against the letter in her pocket. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope. She waited until Margaret went into town that afternoon before reading Thomas's letter. She climbed up into the hayloft of the small barn where the light filtered through the slats and she could see anyone approaching. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier, and as she unfolded it, a photograph slipped out. It showed Thomas standing in front of a brick building, looking older and more serious than she remembered. The letter was filled with news from Boston, stories about mutual friends and questions about her life in New Mexico. He worried about her, he wrote. Her last letter had sounded sad, and he wanted to know if she was truly all right. If she needed to come home, he would find a way to make it happen. He was saving money, and by the end of summer, he should have enough for her train fare and a little extra to help her get settled. Lila read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word. Then she carefully hid it beneath a loose board in the loft, along with the photograph. She would write back tonight after Margaret went to sleep. She would tell Thomas everything about the burned letters and the suffocating loneliness and the way Margaret seemed determined to erase her past. But when she climbed down from the loft, Margaret was waiting in the barn doorway, her face twisted with fury. "You think I do not know what you're doing?" Margaret advanced into the barn, and Lila instinctively backed toward the ladder. That Jennings boy had no right to interfere. I am your legal guardian, and I decide what is best for you. "Those letters are mine," Lila said. "You have no right to keep them from me. I have every right. Your father left you in my care, and I will not have you running off to Boston the moment some boy sends you train fare." Margaret's eyes were hard. "You will give me that letter, and you will not contact your brother again." "No." The word hung in the air between them. Margaret's face flushed red, and for a moment Lila thought she might strike her. Instead, she turned on her heel and stalked back to the house. Lila remained in the barn, her heart pounding. She knew there would be consequences, but she could not bring herself to care. She was tired of being silent, tired of being obedient to a woman who treated her like a servant. That night, Margaret locked Lila's bedroom door from the outside. The next morning, she found her breakfast shoved under the door, cold and barely edible. It was clear that Margaret intended to keep her prisoner until she submitted. But Lila had spent her childhood climbing trees in Boston and scaling the rocky hills around Rayton. The window in her room was not large, but it was large enough. She waited until Margaret went to feed the chickens. Then she pushed the window open and squeezed through, dropping to the ground below. She landed hard, scraping her palms, but she was free. She ran toward town, her skirts hiked up, her breath coming in gasps. She did not have a plan beyond getting away from the house, from Margaret's control. The town was just waking up when she arrived, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. She stopped outside the post office, trying to catch her breath and decide what to do next. "Miss Norton?" She turned to find Zachary leading his horse down the main street. He took one look at her disheveled appearance, and his expression darkened. "What happened?" "My stepmother." Lila's voice shook despite her best efforts. "She locked me in my room. She wants to keep me from writing to my brother, from having any contact with anyone from home." Zachary's jaw tightened. He glanced around the street, then back at her. "Come with me. You cannot go back there." "I have nowhere else to go." "The Taylor Ranch. Mrs. Taylor is a good woman, and she has a soft spot for people in need. She will give you a place to stay, at least until we can figure something out." He offered his hand. "Please, Miss Norton, let me help you." Lila hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, she looked back once at the road leading to her stepmother's ranch. She did not know what would happen next, but anything was better than being locked in that room, cut off from the world. The Taylor Ranch was larger than Margaret's, with a sprawling house and several outbuildings. Mrs. Taylor was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to Lila's story without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each word. "That woman has no right to treat you that way," Mrs. Taylor said finally. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. We can always use help around the house, and I will pay you fair wages for your work." "Thank you," Lila said, relief washing over her. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary, dear. Now let me show you to a room where you can rest and clean up. You look like you have been through an ordeal." The room Mrs. Taylor gave her was small, but clean, with a real bed and curtains on the window. Lila sank onto the mattress, suddenly exhausted. She had escaped, but she knew Margaret would not let this go. The woman was vindictive and determined, and Lila had just defied her in the worst possible way. Over the next few days, Lila settled into life at the Taylor Ranch. She helped Mrs. Taylor with cooking and cleaning, and in the evening she sat on the porch with the family listening to the ranch hands tell stories about cattle drives and wild horses. Zachary was often there, and she found herself looking forward to his presence. He was quiet but thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh despite everything. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Zachary handed her a folded piece of paper. "I thought you might want to write to your brother," he said. "I can post it for you next time I go to town." Lila unfolded the paper, her throat tight. "Thank you. I was not sure how to manage it without Margaret finding out. I will make sure it gets to him." Zachary leaned back against the porch railing. "You know, I meant what I said before about understanding what it is like to be alone. My parents died in a fire when I was 16. I had a sister, but she went to live with relatives in Kansas, and I have not seen her since. Letters were all we had for a while, but then she stopped writing. I think her new family did not approve of me." "I am sorry," Lila said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was, but it taught me something important. Family is not just blood, it is the people who show up for you when things get hard." He met her eyes. "You have people here now, Miss Norton. You're not alone anymore." Lila felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in months. "Please call me Lila." "Lila?" He smiled. "And you should know, Margaret came by yesterday while you were helping Mrs. Taylor in the kitchen. She was demanding that Mrs. Taylor send you back." "Mrs. Taylor told her in no uncertain terms that you were staying, and if Margaret had a problem with it, she could take it up with the sheriff." "What did the sheriff say?" "Mrs. Taylor is friends with the sheriff's wife. I think Margaret realized she was outmatched." Zachary's expression grew serious. "But she is not going to let this go, Lila. She wants control of you, and women like that do not give up easily." "I know." Lila looked down at the blank paper in her hands. "But I cannot go back there. I would rather work as a hired hand on a dozen ranches than spend another day under her roof." "You will not have to," Zachary said firmly. "I promise you that." Lila wrote to Thomas that night telling him everything that had happened. She assured him she was safe, that she had found good people who were helping her, but she did not mention Zachary specifically. She was not sure what to say about the cowboy who had gone out of his way to help her, who made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. The next morning, Zachary was gone before sunrise, riding into town to post the letter. When he returned that evening, his expression was grim. "Margaret was at the post office, huh?" he said, pulling Lila aside. "She saw me mailing your letter. She tried to bribe the postmaster to open it and tell her what it said, but he refused. She knows you are writing to your brother now." Lila's heart sank. What will she do? "I do not know, but we need to be careful." Zachary hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out another envelope. "This came for you from Boston." Lila took the letter, her hands shaking slightly. It was from Thomas, dated just a week after his last letter. She tore it open and read quickly. Thomas was worried. He had written twice now without response, and he needed to know she was all right. He was planning to come to New Mexico if he did not hear from her soon. "I need to write back immediately," Lila said. "He's going to come out here if I do not reassure him." "Then write," Zachary said. "I will post it tomorrow, and I will make sure it gets to him." But when Zachary went to town the next day, Margaret was waiting at the post office again. She had convinced the postmaster to delay any letters from Lila, claiming she had a legal right as her guardian. Zachary argued, but the postmaster was a timid man who feared confrontation. In the end, Zachary left without posting the letter. When he returned to the ranch, he found Lila in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. He told her what had happened, and he watched her face fall. "She has cut me off completely," Lila said. "Thomas will think something terrible has happened. He will come out here, and I cannot let him waste his money on a trip across the country." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I wrote to him?" Lila looked up. "What?" "What if I wrote letters to you from your brother, just until we can figure out a way to get your real letters through?" He held up a hand before she could protest. "I know it is not the same, but at least it would be something. You would have letters to read, something to remind you that someone is thinking of you." "That is a kind thought, Zachary, but it would not be the same at all. They would be from you, not Thomas." "Then I will write them from me," Zachary said. "I will write to you every day if you want, about the ranch, about the horses, about anything and everything. You need letters, Lila. You need to know someone is thinking of you. Let me be that person." Lila stared at him, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "Why would you do that for me?" Zachary's eyes were steady on hers. "Because I know what it is like to lose your connection to home, because you deserve better than what Margaret is doing to you. And because I want to." He paused. "If you will let me." Lila felt tears prick her eyes. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Zachary smiled, that transformative smile that made her chest feel warm, and then he turned and headed toward the bunkhouse. The first letter appeared the next morning, tucked under her door. Lila unfolded it with trembling hands. "Dear Lila," it began in Zachary's neat handwriting, "I hope this finds you well. I wanted to tell you about something I saw this morning. There was a coyote out near the north pasture, just sitting on a rock watching the sun come up. I have seen coyotes before, of course, but this one seemed different. It looked peaceful, like it was taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of the morning before getting on with the business of survival. It made me think of you and how strong you are, even when things are hard. I hope you know that. Yours, Zachary." Lila pressed the letter to her chest, emotion overwhelming her. It was not from Thomas, but it was something. It was proof that she mattered to someone, that her story was not invisible. The letters continued, one every morning. Sometimes they were short, just a few lines about the weather or a funny thing one of the horses had done. Other times they were longer, full of observations about the landscape or stories from Zachary's past. Lila kept them all, tucking them into a box under her bed where Margaret could never find them. And slowly, something began to shift inside her. She found herself thinking about Zachary at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, what he would write about the next day. She looked forward to seeing him in the evenings, to the conversations they had on the porch while the stars came out. He was easy to talk to, and he listened in a way that made her feel heard. One evening, about 2 weeks after the letters had started, Zachary found her sitting by the creek that ran through the Taylor property. She was reading one of his letters, a smile on her face. "Which one is that?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "The one about the thunderstorm," Lila said, "when you described the lightning hitting the old tree. You made it sound like poetry." Zachary looked embarrassed. "I just wrote what I saw." "You have a gift," Lila said, "for seeing beauty in things, for putting it into words." She folded the letter carefully. "These letters have meant more to me than you know, Zachary. They have kept me going when I felt like giving up." "I am glad," Zachary said quietly. "Writing them has been good for me too. It makes me pay attention to things I might otherwise miss." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water burble over the rocks. Then Lila said, "I have been thinking about Margaret, about why she is so determined to control me. I think it is because she knows I am the only reminder of my father's first marriage, his first love. She wants to erase that part of his life, and I am in the way." "You are not something to be erased," Zachary said fiercely. "You are a person with your own life, your own dreams. She has no right to take that from you." But legally she does. Until I turn 21, she is my guardian. She can make decisions for me, keep me from leaving. Lila looked at him. I have been thinking about ways to change that. Marriage would free me from her control. Zachary's expression shifted, became guarded. Are you thinking of marrying someone? I do not know anyone who would have me, Lila said with a bitter laugh. I am a girl with no money, no prospects, and a stepmother who hates me. Not exactly an appealing match. That is not true, Zachary said. Any man would be lucky to have you. Lila! Their eyes met, and Lila felt the air between them change, become charged with something unspoken. She wondered if Zachary felt it too, this pull between them that had been growing stronger with each passing day. Before she could say anything, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted the moment. They both turned to see one of the Taylor ranch hands riding toward them at full gallop. Zachary, the ranch hand called, you are needed at the house. Margaret Norton is here, and she has the sheriff with her. Lila's stomach dropped. She and Zachary hurried back to the house, where they found Margaret standing on the porch with Sheriff Coleman, a portly man in his 50s who looked distinctly uncomfortable. There she is, Margaret said, pointing at Lila. Sheriff, I want you to arrest her for theft. Theft? Lila repeated, incredulous. I have not stolen anything. You stole items from my house when you ran away, clothing, personal effects. All of it belongs to me now. Margaret's smile was cruel. And if you do not return with me immediately, I will press charges. Now, Mrs. Norton, Sheriff Coleman said, clearly unhappy with the situation, I am not sure this is really a matter for the law. The girl took her own belongings. They belonged to her father, and he left everything to me in his will. That makes them mine. Margaret crossed her arms. Either she comes back with me or I want her arrested. Those clothes were mine, Lila said, her voice shaking with rage. My father bought them for me. They were never yours. Everything your father owned is mine now, including you. Margaret's eyes glittered with malice. You are coming home, Lila, one way or another. She is not going anywhere, Mrs. Taylor said, emerging from the house. She planted herself between Lila and the sheriff, her expression formidable. This is harassment, Sheriff Coleman, and you know it. That girl has every right to her own belongings, and she has every right to choose where she lives. Until she is 21, I am her legal guardian, Margaret said. The law is on my side. Sheriff Coleman sighed. He looked at Lila, and she saw sympathy in his eyes. Miss Norton, I do not want to arrest you. But technically, Mrs. Norton does have a legal claim. Unless you return the items in question, I may have to take you into custody. This is absurd, Zachary said. You cannot arrest her for taking her own clothes. I can if her guardian demands it, the sheriff said unhappily. Lila felt trapped, the walls closing in again. She had escaped once, but Margaret was determined to drag her back, to assert her control, and the law was on her side. Was. Wait, Zachary said suddenly, there is another way? Everyone turned to look at him. He stepped forward, his expression determined. Lila would not be under Mrs. Norton's guardianship if she were married. Is that correct, Sheriff? Sheriff Coleman nodded slowly. That is correct. A married woman is under her husband's authority, not her parents or guardians. Then I propose we get married, Zachary said, looking at Lila. Right now, today. That would solve the legal problem, would it not? Lila's heart stopped. Margaret's face turned purple with rage. Mrs. Taylor looked stunned, and the sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly. Zachary, Lila whispered, you do not have to do this. I know, Zachary said. His eyes were steady on hers, but I want to, if you will have me. Lila looked at him. This cowboy who had shown her more kindness in a few weeks than Margaret had in over a year. She thought about his letters, about the way he listened to her, about the way her heart had started to beat faster whenever he was near. It was not the proposal she had imagined as a girl, full of romance and pretty words, but it was real, and it was offered freely, and it was her way out. Yes, she said, yes, I will marry you. Margaret made a sound like a strangled cat. This is ridiculous. You cannot just get married on a whim to avoid your legal obligations. Actually, they can, Sheriff Coleman said, and for the first time he sounded amused. If they are both of age and willing, there is nothing stopping them. We can ride into town right now and have Reverend Matthews perform the ceremony. I forbid it, Margaret said. You have no authority to forbid it, Mrs. Taylor said calmly. Miss Norton is 19 years old. She can make her own decisions about marriage. Margaret looked like she wanted to argue further, but she clearly knew she was beaten. She glared at Lila with pure venom. You will regret this, she hissed, when you are living in poverty with a ranch hand who can barely afford to feed himself. You will wish you had listened to me. I highly doubt that, Lila said. She felt surprisingly calm, as if she had stepped outside her own body and was watching the scene from a distance. I would rather be poor and free than wealthy and imprisoned. Margaret turned and stalked to her horse, mounting with jerky, angry movements. She rode away without another word, and Lila felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Well, Sheriff Coleman said, I suppose we should head to town and make this official, unless you two want to reconsider? No, Zachary and Lila said at the same time. They looked at each other, and despite the absurdity of the situation, Lila felt a smile tug at her lips. Then let us go, Mrs. Taylor said, and afterwards we will have a proper celebration here at the ranch. It is not every day we have a wedding. The ceremony was brief and awkward, performed in the small church at the edge of Rayton with Sheriff Coleman and Mrs. Taylor as witnesses. Reverend Matthews seemed confused by the hasty nature of the wedding, but he asked no questions. When Zachary slipped a simple gold band onto Lila's finger, one he had apparently bought months ago for a reason he did not explain, she felt tears prick her eyes. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Matthews said. You may kiss your bride. Zachary leaned in slowly, giving Lila time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. When his lips touched hers, soft and tentative, she felt something settle into place inside her. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become love given time. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Taylor had organized a small celebration. Several of the ranch hands congratulated them, and someone produced a fiddle and started playing. Lila found herself swept into a dance, passed from one partner to another, until finally Zachary claimed her for himself. Are you all right? He asked as they moved together to the music. This has been a strange day. Strange does not begin to cover it, Lila said, but she was smiling. Thank you, Zachary, for giving me my freedom. You would have found a way regardless, Zachary said, but I'm glad I could help. He hesitated. I want you to know I do not expect anything from you. This marriage can be whatever you want it to be. If you want it to be in name only, I will respect that. Lila looked up at him, at the sincerity in his eyes. What do you want it to be? I want it to be real, Zachary said quietly. Not today. Maybe not for a long time. But eventually. I want to know you, Lila. I want to understand what makes you laugh, what you dream about, what you fear. I want this to be a real marriage, if you will give me the chance. Lila's heart was pounding. I want that too, she whispered. I think I have wanted it for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it. Zachary's smile was radiant. He pulled her closer, and they danced until the stars came out and the music finally stopped. Mrs. Taylor had prepared a small cabin on the edge of the property for them, a place that had been used for storage but was now clean and furnished with a bed, a table, and 2 chairs. It was not much, but it was theirs. That first night, they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching but aware of each other's presence. Lila felt strange, like she was living someone else's life. This morning she had been an orphan under her stepmother's thumb. Now she was a married woman, lying next to a man she barely knew but somehow trusted implicitly. Zachary, she whispered, yes? Will you still write me letters? There was a pause, and then Zachary laughed softly. Every day, he promised. Even though we will be living in the same house, I will still write to you every day. Good, Lila said. She reached out in the darkness and found his hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, and she fell asleep like that, holding on to her cowboy husband who had saved her in more ways than one. The next morning, Lila woke to find a letter tucked under her pillow. She unfolded it carefully, smiling before she even read the words. "Dear Lila," it said, "good morning, wife. I hope you slept well. I have been thinking about what I want our life to look like, and I realize that I do not need much. Just you, this cabin, and the chance to wake up every morning knowing you chose to stay. That is enough for me. That is everything. Yours always, Zachary." Lila pressed the letter to her heart, then got up to start breakfast. When Zachary came in from feeding the horses, she handed him a cup of coffee and said, "I need to write to Thomas. He needs to know I am all right, that I am married now." "I have been thinking about that," Zachary said. "What if we took a trip? Not immediately, but in a few months. We could save up enough for train tickets to Boston. You could see your brother in person and he could meet me. It would put his mind at ease." "You would do that?" Lila asked, stunned. "Travel all the way to Boston just so I could see Thomas?" "Of course," Zachary said, as if it were obvious. "He is your family, Lila. I want him to know you are happy and safe, and I want him to know that I will take care of you." Lila felt tears well up. She had cried more in the past few weeks than she had in years, but these were good tears. Tears of relief and gratitude, and something that felt dangerously close to love. She set down her coffee cup and crossed to where Zachary stood. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Zachary held her carefully, as if she were something precious. "It is going to be all right," he murmured into her hair. "Everything is going to be all right now." And for the first time in a long time, Lila believed it. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Zachary worked on the Taylor ranch during the day, helping with the cattle and horses. Lila took on more responsibilities around the house, cooking and cleaning alongside Mrs. Taylor, who treated her like a daughter. In the evenings, Zachary and Lila would sit on the porch of their little cabin talking about everything and nothing. And every morning, without fail, there was a new letter waiting for Lila. The letters were not long, usually just a few paragraphs, but they were heartfelt. Zachary wrote about his day, about the things he noticed, about his thoughts and feelings, and slowly Lila began to write back. She would leave her letters on the table for him to find. Small notes about her own observations, her hopes for the future, her growing feelings for him. It became their way of communicating the things that were too difficult to say out loud. Through the letters, Lila told Zachary about her mother's death, about the loneliness she had felt moving west with her father, about her fear that she would never belong anywhere. Zachary wrote about the fire that had killed his parents, about the guilt he carried for surviving when they had not, about his sister in Kansas who had slowly stopped answering his letters. They learned each other through words on paper, and as they did, the space between them in bed grew smaller. One night, Lila woke to find herself curled against Zachary's side, his arm around her. She stayed very still, not wanting to wake him, and thought about how safe she felt, how right this was beginning to feel. About 6 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at the Taylor ranch addressed to Lila. It was from Thomas, finally. Zachary had managed to get a letter through to him by sending it to a friend in Santa Fe, who then posted it from there, avoiding Margaret's interference. Now Thomas had written back, and his relief was palpable even on the page. "My dear sister," the letter began, "I cannot tell you how worried I have been. When your letters stopped coming, I feared the worst. I am so relieved to know you are safe, though I confess I am shocked by the news of your marriage. I hope this Zachary Jennings is a good man who will treat you well. I have been saving money for a train ticket, and I should have enough by the end of August to come visit you. I want to meet your husband and see for myself that you are happy. Until then, please write to me as often as you can. Your loving brother, Thomas." Lila read the letter 3 times, then showed it to Zachary. He smiled. "August," he said. "That gives us a few months to save our own money. Maybe we can meet him in Santa Fe, make a trip of it." "You are too good to me," Lila said. Nonsense, Zachary replied. You are my wife. Making you happy is not a burden, Lila. It is a privilege. That night, as they lay in bed, Lila turned to face Zachary. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across his face. I need to tell you something, she said. Well, what is it? I am falling in love with you, Lila said. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to continue. I know this marriage started as a solution to a problem, but it has become so much more than that. You have become so much more than that, and I needed you to know. Zachary's eyes were bright in the darkness. He reached up and touched her face gently. Lila, he said, I have been in love with you since the first time I saw you in town, back before everything with Margaret got so bad. You were buying vegetables at the market and you were haggling with the vendor over the price of tomatoes. You had this determined look on your face like you would not let him overcharge you, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Lila laughed, a watery sound. That is when you fell in love with me? Over tomatoes? Over your spirit, Zachary corrected. Over the way you stood up for yourself, even in small ways. I wanted to know you then, but I did not have the courage to approach you. When I heard what Margaret was doing, it gave me an excuse to talk to you, and every day since then, I have fallen a little more in love. Why did you not say anything? Because I wanted you to have time, Zachary said. I wanted you to choose me, not because I saved you from Margaret, but because you wanted me for myself. I wanted it to be real. It is real, Lila whispered. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding, but something deeper, more honest. Zachary responded immediately, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. They kissed until Lila's head was spinning, until she felt like she was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zachary said, Are you sure? I am sure, Lila said. I am your wife, Zachary. I want to be your wife in every way. What followed was tender and awkward and perfect. They learned each other in a new way that night. And when Lila woke the next morning wrapped in Zachary's arms, she felt transformed. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she thought. Not the cold, loveless arrangement Margaret had with her father, but something warm and alive and full of possibility. The letter that morning was waiting on the table when she got up to make coffee. Dear Lila, it read, Last night was the most incredible night of my life. I keep thinking about how lucky I am that somehow in the midst of all the pain and difficulty I found you. Or maybe you found me. Either way, I am grateful every single day. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Yours forever, Zachary. Lila smiled and tucked the letter into the box where she kept all the others. She had dozens now. A written record of their courtship and the growth of their love. She would keep them forever, she decided. One day when they were old, she would read them again and remember these early days when everything was new and uncertain and absolutely perfect. As spring turned to summer, Lila and Zachary's life together deepened. They worked hard, saved their money, and made plans for the future. Zachary talked about eventually buying his own piece of land, starting a small ranch. Lila talked about planting a garden, maybe getting some chickens of her own. They were simple dreams, but they were theirs. Margaret made one more attempt to cause trouble. She showed up at the Taylor ranch in early July, demanding to speak to Lila. Mrs. Taylor refused to let her on the property, but Margaret stood outside the gate and shouted accusations. She claimed Lila had bewitched Zachary, that the marriage was invalid because Lila had been under duress. She threatened to sue to take them to court. Sheriff Coleman showed up and told Margaret to leave before he arrested her for disturbing the peace. Margaret left, but not before shooting Lila a look of pure hatred. This is not over, she called. You think you have won, but you have not. I will make sure you regret this. Let her try, Zachary said, his arm around Lila. We have done nothing wrong and everyone in town knows it. She cannot hurt us anymore. But Lila was not so sure. She knew Margaret, knew how vindictive she could be. She spent the next few days looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It came in the form of a fire. One night in late July, Lila woke to the smell of smoke. She shook Zachary awake, and they stumbled outside to find the small barn near their cabin engulfed in flames. Zachary ran to get help while Lila tried to free the horses inside. She managed to get them out, her lungs burning from the smoke, her hands blistered from the heat. By the time the ranch hands arrived with buckets of water, the barn was lost. They managed to keep the fire from spreading to the cabin or the main house, but the damage was done. In the ashes, they found evidence of kerosene, proof that the fire had been deliberately set. It was Margaret, Lila said, coughing. It had to be. We do not know that, Sheriff Coleman said. He had been summoned from town and arrived to find the smoldering remains. Do you have any proof? Who else would do this? Zachary demanded. She threatened us just a few weeks ago. Threats are not the same as proof, the sheriff said. He looked tired and frustrated. I will talk to her, but unless we have witnesses or evidence directly linking her to the fire, there's not much I can do. In the end, nothing came of it. Margaret denied any involvement, and without proof, the sheriff could not charge her. But everyone in town knew the truth. People started avoiding Margaret, refusing to do business with her. She became isolated, bitter, a cautionary tale about what happened when you let anger and jealousy consume you. For Lila and Zachary, the fire was a setback, but not a disaster. The Taylor family helped them rebuild the barn, and the community rallied around them. It was in those weeks of rebuilding that Lila truly felt like she belonged in Rayton, like she had finally found her place in the world. In late August, Thomas arrived in New Mexico. Lila and Zachary took the train to Santa Fe to meet him, and when Lila saw her brother standing on the platform, she burst into tears. They hugged for a long time, neither of them speaking, just holding on to each other. Thomas was taller than Lila remembered, his face more mature, but his eyes were the same, warm and kind and full of love. When Lila introduced him to Zachary, Thomas looked her husband up and down critically. You are the cowboy who has been taking care of my sister, Thomas said. Yes, sir, Zachary replied, and I intend to keep taking care of her for the rest of my life. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then held out his hand. Then I am glad to meet you, Zachary. Any man who makes my sister this happy is all right with me. They spent a week in Santa Fe showing Thomas around, eating at restaurants, talking late into the night. Thomas told them about his life in Boston, about his job and his friends and a girl he was courting. Lila told him everything that had happened with Margaret, and Thomas's face darkened with anger. I should have come sooner, he said. I should have gotten you out of there the moment Father died. You did not know how bad it was, Lila said. And besides, if you had come sooner, I might never have met Zachary. Thomas smiled. I suppose that is true. And I do like him, Lila. He is a good man. You can see it in the way he looks at you. On Thomas's last night in Santa Fe before he had to return to Boston, the three of them sat in a small restaurant finishing their meal. Thomas raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, and to the people who help us find our way when we are lost. To new beginnings, Lila and Zachary echoed, clinking their glasses against his. As Thomas prepared to leave the next morning, he pulled Lila aside. Write to me, he said. Really write to me this time. I want to know everything that happens in your life. I will, Lila promised, and you write back. Tell me about that girl you were courting. I want to know if she is good enough for you. Thomas laughed. Deal. He hugged her one more time, then shook Zachary's hand. Take care of her, he said. Always, Zachary replied. On the train back to Rayton, Lila leaned against Zachary's shoulder, feeling content. Thank you, she said. For this trip, for everything. You have given me my family back. You are my family now, Zachary said, but I'm glad you still have Thomas too. Everyone needs people who love them. Back at the ranch, life continued. Autumn arrived, painting the landscape in shades of gold and orange. Lila and Zachary talked about their future, about the land they would buy, the children they hoped to have. And every morning, without fail, there was a letter waiting for Lila. The letters had evolved. They were still full of observations and thoughts, but now they also included plans and dreams. Zachary wrote about the ranch he wanted to build, about the life he envisioned for them. Lila wrote back, adding her own ideas, her own hopes. The letters became a conversation, a way of building their future together, one word at a time. In November, Lila realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for a few weeks, tired and nauseated, and Mrs. Taylor had suggested she might be expecting. When the doctor confirmed it, Lila felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, excitement, anxiety, all mixed together. She told Zachary that evening, after dinner. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a child. "We're going to have a baby," he said, setting her down gently. "Lila, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Lila asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am everything." Zachary cupped her face in his hands. "You are going to be an incredible mother, and I am going to do everything I can to be a good father. Our child is going to be so loved, Lila. So incredibly loved." That night, the letter Zachary left for her was different. "Dear Lila," it said, "I do not have words for what I am feeling right now. When you told me about the baby, my whole world shifted. Suddenly, everything has new meaning. I want to build a good life for our child, a safe and happy home where they will always feel loved and protected. I want them to have what I did not have, what you did not have. I want them to grow up knowing they are cherished. And I want to be the kind of father who shows up every single day, who keeps his promises, who loves their mother with his whole heart. Thank you for giving me this gift, Lila. Thank you for choosing me. Yours always, Zachary." Lila cried reading it, hormones and happiness making her emotions overwhelming. She saved that letter in a special place, knowing she would want to show it to their child one day. The pregnancy was not easy. Lila was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Zachary hovered, worried and attentive, bringing her crackers and ginger tea. Mrs. Taylor clucked over her like a mother hen, making sure she rested and ate properly. By the time spring arrived again, Lila was feeling better, her belly swelling with new life. They wrote to Thomas telling him the news. His reply was ecstatic. He promised to visit again as soon as the baby was born, and he sent money for baby clothes and supplies. Lila was touched by his generosity, by the way he embraced his role as uncle even from across the country. In April of 1882, just over a year after that terrible morning when Margaret had burned her first letter, Lila went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary was certain something was going wrong. But Mrs. Taylor had assisted with dozens of births, and she knew what she was doing. After 18 hours, Lila gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him William Thomas Jennings, after Zachary's father and Lila's brother. He had Zachary's dark hair and Lila's green eyes, and when Zachary held him for the first time, he wept openly. "Hello, William," he whispered. "I am your father, and I am so happy to meet you." Lila watched from the bed, exhausted but glowing. This was her family, she thought, her husband and her son. After all the loss and loneliness, she had found something real and lasting. She had found home. The letter that appeared the morning after William was born was the shortest Zachary had ever written. "Dear Lila," it said, "thank you for our son. I love you. Always and forever, Zachary." Lila tucked it into the box with all the others, hundreds of letters now, a chronicle of their love story. One day she would give them to William, so he would know how his parents met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together despite everything working against them. Thomas visited when William was 3 months old, and he fell in love with his nephew immediately. He told them he had proposed to his girl, and they were getting married in the fall. He wanted Lila and Zachary to come to Boston for the wedding, and they promised they would try. "You seem happy," Thomas said to Lila one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Zachary play with William. "Truly happy." "I am," Lila said. "I never thought I would find this, Thomas. After everything with Margaret, I thought I was destined to be alone and miserable. But Zachary saved me." "I think you saved each other," Thomas said. "He needed you just as much as you needed him. That is what real love is, Lila. Two people choosing each other every single day." Lila thought about the letters, about the way Zachary had chosen to write to her every day, even when he did not have to. That was love, she realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but small, consistent acts of devotion, showing up day after day, no matter what. In the fall, they did travel to Boston for Thomas's wedding. It was Lila's first time back east since her father had brought her to New Mexico, and it felt strange and familiar all at once. She introduced Zachary to old friends and distant relatives, and everyone remarked on how well she looked, how happy she seemed. At the wedding, Thomas pulled her aside. "I am glad you found your place, Lila. I worried about you for so long, but I do not need to worry anymore. You have a good life out there in New Mexico." "I do," Lila agreed. "But I miss you, Thomas. I miss having you close." "I miss you too," Thomas said. "But we will write. We will always write, and we will visit when we can. Distance does not change how much I love you." They returned to Rayton with stories and memories, and life settled into a new rhythm. William grew quickly, a happy baby who smiled easily and laughed often. Zachary was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. And Lila discovered that motherhood suited her, that she loved the routine of caring for someone who depended on her completely. In the spring of 1883, Zachary came home with news. He had found a piece of land for sale, 50 acres about 10 miles from the Taylor Ranch. It was rough country, but there was water and good grazing. With the money they had saved, plus a loan from the bank, they could afford to buy it. "Our own ranch," Zachary said, his eyes shining. "We could build a house, start our own herd. It would be hard work, but we could do it, Lila. We could build something that is truly ours." Lila looked at William, now almost a year old, crawling around the floor of their cabin. She thought about the life they could give him on their own land, the freedom and independence. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us build our future." They moved in the summer, camping in a tent while Zachary worked on building a small house. It was a rough few months, but the Taylor family helped, and slowly their home took shape. It was not big or fancy, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was sturdy, and it was theirs. By the time William turned 2, they had a small herd of cattle and a vegetable garden that Lila tended with pride. Zachary had built a barn and a chicken coop, and they had 2 horses and a milk cow. It was a modest operation, but it was growing. And through it all, the letters continued. Even though they lived and worked side by side, Zachary still left Lila a letter every morning. Sometimes they were practical, lists of things that needed doing or ideas for improving the ranch. Other times they were romantic, full of love and longing. Lila treasured each one, and she still wrote back, her own thoughts and feelings captured on paper. In 1884, Lila became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in early 1885, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose Margaret Jennings, the middle name a deliberate choice. Lila had spent years hating Margaret, resenting her cruelty, but she realized that carrying that anger was only hurting herself. By giving her daughter that name, she was letting go, forgiving not because Margaret deserved it, but because Lila deserved peace. When they sent word to Thomas about Rose's birth, he wrote back immediately. He and his wife had also just had a baby, a little girl named Emma. The cousins would grow up not knowing each other well, but they would exchange letters and photographs, maintaining the family connection across the miles. As Rose and William grew, Zachary and Lila's ranch prospered. They added more cattle, hired a couple of ranch hands, and expanded their house to accommodate their growing family. Lila wrote to Thomas regularly, and true to his word, he wrote back. Their letters were not as frequent as the ones Zachary left her, but they were consistent, a lifeline connecting her to her past while she built her future. In the summer of 1886, Margaret died. She had been living alone on the ranch, stubborn and bitter until the end. The sheriff sent word, and Lila felt a complicated mix of emotions. Sadness for the woman Margaret could have been, relief that she no longer had to fear her stepmother's interference, and guilt for feeling relieved. "You do not need to feel guilty," Zachary said when she confessed her feelings. "She made her choices, Lila. You tried to have a relationship with her and she rejected it. You are allowed to feel however you feel." They attended the funeral, mostly out of respect for Lila's father. There were few mourners, and as they lowered Margaret into the ground, Lila felt a chapter of her life closing. She had spent so much time defined by what Margaret had done to her, by the letters that had been burned, and the freedom that had been stolen. But that was over now. She was Lila Jennings, wife and mother and rancher, and she had built a beautiful life despite everything. That evening, Zachary's letter was longer than usual. "Dear Lila," it said, "today we buried a woman who tried very hard to break you, but she failed. You are stronger than she ever gave you credit for, stronger than I think you even know. You took the worst thing that happened to you and turned it into something beautiful. You turned it into us, into our family, into this life we have built together. I am in awe of you, Lila. I have been since the day I met you, and I will be until the day I die. Yours forever, Zachary." Lila read the letter through tears, grateful for this man who saw her so clearly, who loved her so completely. She tucked it into the box with all the others, the collection growing larger every year. In 1887, they had another son, James, named after Zachary's grandfather. Their family was complete now, 3 healthy children running around the ranch, filling it with noise and laughter. Lila had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this full and rich. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. William grew into a serious boy who loved the horses. Rose was spirited and stubborn, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. James was the baby, sweet and affectionate, always clinging to his mother's skirts. Through it all, Zachary wrote his letters. There were thousands of them now, filling multiple boxes. Lila had started writing dates on the envelopes, organizing them by year. Sometimes on quiet evenings, she would pull out the early letters and read them, marveling at how far they had come. One evening in 1890, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila said, "Do you remember when you first started writing to me?" "Of course," Zachary said. "Margaret had convinced the postmaster not to give you your mail. I wanted to find a way to make you feel less alone." "You did more than that," Lila said. "You gave me hope. You gave me something to look forward to every day, and eventually you gave me everything I have now. This ranch, our children, this life, it all started with those letters." Zachary took her hand. "I am glad I wrote them. But Lila, you need to know the letters were just the beginning. What we have now, this life we built, that is not because of me. That is because of us, because we chose each other and kept choosing each other, even when things were hard." "I will always choose you," Lila said, "every single day for the rest of my life." "And I will always choose you," Zachary replied. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and in the background they could hear their children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In 1895, William turned 13 and started taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. He was growing into a fine young man, hard-working and responsible, and Zachary was proud of him. Rose was 10, still climbing trees and racing her brothers, refusing to conform to anyone's expectations of what a young lady should be. James was 8, gentle and creative, always drawing pictures or making up stories. Thomas visited that summer, bringing his wife and 3 children. It was the first time their families had all been together, and it was chaotic and wonderful. The cousins played together while the adults caught up, sharing stories and memories. "You have done well for yourself, Lila," Thomas said as they walked around the ranch. "This is a real accomplishment, what you and Zachary have built here." "I could not have done it without him," Lila said. "He saved me, Thomas. In every way a person can be saved." "And you saved him right back," Thomas said. "That is what makes it work." As the years continued to pass, Lila and Zachary grew older together. Their children grew up and started lives of their own. William took over much of the ranch operation, eventually marrying a girl from town and building his own house on the property. Rose shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, traveling to Santa Fe for training, and then returning to Rayton to open a school. James moved to Denver to study art, a choice that worried his parents but ultimately made him happy. Through it all, the letters continued. Even when they were old and gray, when their bodies ached and their energy flagged, Zachary still left Lila a letter every morning. They were shorter now, sometimes just a few lines, but they were there. A constant reminder that he was thinking of her, that he loved her, that she was not alone. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1911, Lila brought out all the boxes of letters. There were thousands of them, decades worth of daily devotion captured on paper. Their children and grandchildren gathered around as Lila told them the story of how she and Zachary had met, how he had started writing to her when her stepmother burned her letters from home, how those letters had saved her life in more ways than one. "I want you to understand," Lila told her grandchildren, "that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day. Your grandfather chose to write to me every day, even when he did not have to, even when it would have been easier not to. That is what real love looks like. It looks like showing up consistently no matter what." Zachary, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand. "And your grandmother chose to stay," or he added. "She could have gone back to Boston, could have built a different life. But she stayed here with me in this hard country, and we built something beautiful together. That took courage and commitment, and I have been grateful for it every single day." That night, after everyone had gone home, Zachary wrote Lila one more letter. It said simply, "Dear Lila, 30 years ago, you changed my life. You made me believe in love, in family, in the possibility of happiness. Thank you for every day, every moment, every memory. I love you more now than I did then, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. Yours always, Zachary." Lila read it with tears streaming down her face. She looked at her husband, this cowboy who had kept his promise to write to her every day for 3 decades, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her stepmother had tried to cut her off from love, from connection, from everything that mattered. But Zachary had given it all back to her, one letter at a time. They lived for many more years, watching their grandchildren grow, their ranch prosper, their family expand. Zachary continued writing his daily letters until the very end, even when his hands shook and his vision failed. The last letter he ever wrote to Lila was composed just hours before he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in 1923. "Dear Lila," it said, "I am tired, and I think my time is coming to an end. But I want you to know that I have lived a good life, a happy life, and it is all because of you. You were my salvation, my joy, my everything. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for choosing me. I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next. Yours eternally, Zachary." Lila found the letter on his pillow the next morning. She held it to her heart as she wept, mourning the loss of her great love, but also grateful for the decades they had shared. She lived for 5 more years after Zachary's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the cowboy who had written her letters every day. When Lila died in 1928 at the age of 66, she was buried next to Zachary on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her children placed her collection of letters in a trunk at the foot of her grave, a monument to a love that had endured everything, a testament to the power of showing up day after day with words of love and devotion. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. And in the family house, in a place of honor, sat the trunk full of letters, thousands upon thousands of them, proof that even when someone tries to burn your connections to home, to love, to everything that matters, there are people in the world who will write new ones. People who will give you reasons to hope, reasons to stay, reasons to believe in happy endings. Lila's story became a legend in Raton, passed down through the years. The girl whose stepmother burned her letters, and the cowboy who wrote new ones to her every day, until those letters became the foundation of a love story that lasted a lifetime. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best things, that cruelty can be overcome with kindness, and that love, real love, is spelled out in daily acts of devotion, one letter at a time.